Inside the post office, time seemed frozen. A lone clerk paused over an envelope, unmarked but heavy. The kind of weight that pressed down on more than paper. Inside, Russian rubles, crisp, clean, untraceable. It was the 5th such delivery. Each one found its way to the same place. Room 12, Hotel Lendl. No names, just silence. The War Ministry stirred in whispers. No alarms, only dread. This wasn't just treason, it was surgical. Bleeding Austria from the inside out. They set a trap. An identical envelope, planted, watched. And then, he came. A man in a dark coat, face in shadow, collected the envelope without question. Up the stairs he climbed, as if drawn to his fate. Room 12. He entered, removed his coat, hat, gloves, and the light revealed the unimaginable. Alfred Redl, patriot, spy hunter, chief of counterintelligence, now traitor. There was no knock, no warning, just the door opening behind him. 2 men, no words, no handcuffs, only eyes that had seen enough. There would be no trial, only discretion. A drawer was opened. Inside, a revolver, a sealed envelope. The offer was clear. Redl sat, removed his gloves one last time, and wrote, "I was human. I failed." A breath, a final glance to the window, then a single muffled shot. March 14th, 1864, in the small city of Lemberg, now Lviv, Ukraine, a baby boy named Alfred Redl was born into a struggling family. His father, Franz Redl, worked long hours as a railway clerk, barely earning enough to feed his children. The Redl household knew hunger, but young Alfred had something more powerful than money. A razor-sharp mind. Even as a child, he stood out. While other boys played in the streets, Alfred buried himself in books, solving complex math problems for fun. His teachers whispered that he was too clever for his own good. Then, in 1877, when Alfred was just 13 years old, a visiting military officer noticed him during a school examination. The boy answered every question perfectly. History, geography, even military tactics. The officer, impressed, wrote a letter to the Imperial and Royal War Academy in Vienna. "This boy belongs in the army," it said. And so, in 1883, at age 19, Alfred Redl left his poor family behind and stepped into the grand halls of the War Academy, a place where future generals were made. The War Academy was no ordinary school. It was a fortress of discipline, where young men trained to become officers of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of the most powerful nations in Europe. Alfred thrived. He mastered languages, German, Czech, Polish, Russian, studied codes and ciphers, and learned how to read enemy battle plans. His professors called him the best mind of his generation. In 1892, after graduating top of his class, Alfred was assigned to the General Staff in Vienna, the brain of the Austro-Hungarian military. He had arrived. Vienna in the 1890s was a city of gold and shadows. The streets glittered with opera houses, grand balls, and whispered scandals. Alfred Redl, now a rising star in military intelligence, loved it all. He wore tailored suits, drank the finest champagne, and hosted secret parties in his apartment. Parties where powerful men met in the dark, hiding their true selves. The army knew, but they looked away. Alfred's work was too important, yet his lifestyle cost a fortune. Soon he was drowning in debts. He borrowed from friends, then from loan sharks. The whispers grew louder. Redl spends more than he earns. Redl has dangerous friends. Then, in 1900, the army gave him a new mission, one that would change everything. In October 1900, a sealed letter arrived at the Vienna offices of the Austro-Hungarian General Staff. The orders inside were clear. Captain Alfred Redl was to take command of counterintelligence operations in Prague immediately. The city had become a den of Russian spies, and the empire needed its sharpest mind to root them out. Redl accepted the assignment without hesitation. Prague offered escape, From Vienna's prying eyes, from his mounting debts, and from the whispers that had begun to follow him. By November, he had settled into the Hotel Central, a strategic location between the military garrison and the shadowy Josefov district, where informants traded secrets in smoke-filled taverns. His new office at Hradčany Barracks quickly became the nerve center of the counter-espionage effort. Maps lined the walls, marked with suspected safe houses and known agent routes. Daily police reports flowed in, sightings of suspicious foreigners, intercepted telegrams, servants bribed to rifle through officers' belongings. But Redl soon noticed something unsettling. Files vanished. Meetings were mysteriously canceled. Once, returning unexpectedly, he caught a junior officer searching his desk. The man stammered an excuse and fled. The Russians weren't just operating in Prague. They had infiltrated his own operation. For months, Redl had been watched. The Okhrana, Russia's secret police, knew everything. His financial troubles, his secret vices, the pawnshop ticket for his father's pocket watch gathering dust in Vienna. They had studied his routines, his weaknesses. Then, in the spring of 1901, a well-dressed stranger slid into the seat opposite him at Café Louvre. The man's German was flawless, but the faintest accent betrayed him. He pushed a newspaper across the table, a theater listing circled in ink. The National Theater, Thursday night, Box 14, come alone. Inside the folded paper was the pawnshop ticket. A message, clear as a blade. We know. On May 15, 1903, Redl stepped into the Russian consulate. Rain lashed the windows as Major Alexei Gorlov of the Okhrana gestured to an iron-bound chest. Inside gleamed stacks of gold rubles, enough to erase his debts twice over. A down payment, Gorlov said. The rest comes after your first delivery. A blank sheet of paper slid across the table. Start with the names of your agents in Warsaw. Redl hesitated. Then he took the pen. For years, Alfred Redl walked the razor's edge between loyalty and betrayal. His days were spent hunting spies for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, while his nights were devoted to serving the Russians who owned him. Dead drops became second nature. A hymnal left on a specific pew in St. Nicholas Church contained microfilm of fortress blueprints. An ordinary cigar delivered to his tobacconist hid mobilization plans. Theater playbills at the estate's theater carried coded messages in the margins. The Russians grew increasingly bold. They staged elaborate charades, fake arrests of their own agents, allowing Redl to uncover them and burnish his reputation. While Austrian forces celebrated these victories, real Russian spies slipped through their fingers, carrying stolen secrets across the border. But the weight of his duplicity was crushing him. Redl began drinking absinthe in the afternoons, his hands developing an uncontrollable tremor. Once, in a crowded cafe, he became convinced he was being watched. With sweat beading on his forehead, he hastily burned a stack of stolen documents in an ashtray, laughing too loudly as he told nearby patrons they were love letters from a married woman. The Russians, amused by his unraveling nerves, gave him a mocking code name, Nervny Shar, the nervous ball. December 1907. Redl, now Deputy Chief of Military Intelligence, grew careless. In a moment of complacency, he filed a routine request with the Vienna post office. Any letters addressed to Afaids, opera balls, were to be held for his personal collection. A new clerk, untrained in the shadow protocols of espionage, did something unexpected. He checked the name against official military records. When no opera ball appeared in the registry, suspicion flared. By dusk, the envelope had been intercepted, its contents examined. A bank draft from Zurich for 40,000 francs, payment for treason. The hunt for the traitor began in silence. May 23, 1913. Another envelope arrived at the Vienna post office, postmarked from Berlin's Station 17, a known Russian dead drop. The address was the same. Opera Ball. Major Maximilian Ronge, once Redl's brightest protégé and now head of counterintelligence, took charge. The blank sheet inside was carefully replaced with an identical decoy. Surveillance teams, their faces obscured by newspapers and workmen's clothes, took up positions around the post office, their eyes sharp for the traitor's arrival. The next day, Redl stepped inside. He knew instantly. The clerk's fingers moved too quickly as he handed over the envelope. The woman at the telegraph desk held her gaze a fraction too long. Outside, a bicyclist made impossible turns to keep him in sight. A taxi appeared at too many intersections. A street sweeper leaned on his broom, watching. Yet Redl took the envelope. To refuse it would mean death at Russian hands. That night, at the Hotel Klomser, Redl requested a private room. When Rong's men stormed his suite at midnight, they found only an empty cognac bottle and a note. "I have gone to 13. Room 13 was smaller, dimly lit, the kind of place where merchants counted their earnings in private. Inside, Redl sat perfectly still at a writing desk, his dress uniform meticulously arranged. Before him lay two objects, his service revolver, polished to a dull gleam, and a sealed envelope addressed to Ronge. The first shot exploded through the silence, shattering the mirror across the room. The second did not miss. When Ronge arrived minutes later, he took the unopened letter and burned it without a word. Some secrets were too dangerous to survive. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's motorcade turned onto Franz Josef Street in Sarajevo. Among the assassin's belongings, investigators would later find a detailed map of the Archduke's route, smuggled into Serbia through the very networks Redl had helped build. 6 weeks later, the first artillery shells tore through the night sky over Belgrade. The Great War had begun. And Alfred Redl, the man who had sold his empire, was already a ghost.